Well, hello, this is Dr. Anthereca Lane with Conversations with Dr. Lane. Today we have powerhouses of higher education. We have Bonita Brown and Robert Solomon. Bonita Brown currently serves as the Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer for Northern Kentucky University, where she leads the campus in implementing Success by Design, the university's strategic plan solely focused on student success. She previously worked as the Vice President of Network Engagement at Achieving the Dream, a national nonprofit leader that champions evidence-based institutional improvement in community colleges across the country. In this role, Bonita is responsible for supporting a network of over 220 community colleges in 41 states as they work to implement sustainable campus-wide student success efforts. Prior to this position, she served as the Director of Higher Education Practice with the Education Trust in Washington, D.C. While at the Education Trust, she created and led an initiative entitled Optimizing Academic Success and Institutional Strategy, which was a national network of regional, comprehensive, minority-serving institutions that enroll large numbers of low-income students and students of color. As the Director of Higher Education Practice, she worked with the institutions in assessing data and implementing national best practices for improving student success and closing completion gaps. Previously, she served as the Vice Chancellor and Chief of Staff and as Assistant Secretary to the Board of Trustees at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Over the course of her career, Mrs. Brown has also served as the Chief of Staff at the University of North Texas, General Counsel at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and Assistant Attorney at Winston-Salem State University. She was recently appointed to serve on the boards of the Brighton Center in Kentucky and the Newport History Museum Board. In the past, she served on the boards of United Way of Denton County, Presbyterian Hospital in Denton, Texas, and on the board of the Greensboro History Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina. She has participated in the HERS Leadership Program, the AASCU Millennium Leadership Initiative, and is a graduate of the Harvard Institute of Educational Management. Mrs. Brown received her BA in History from Wake Forest University and her JD from Wake Forest University School of Law. Bonita Brown, it's so wonderful to have you today.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
And we are going to move right along and introduce our next guest, Robert Solomon. Robert Solomon is the Vice President of the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity of Case Western Reserve University. Robert is a graduate of Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, and the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. He began his career as an Assistant Attorney General for the state of Ohio. He also served as a Franklin County Municipal Court Magistrate before joining the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law to work in administration. During his tenure at the College of Law, he has served as assistant to the Dean, Director of the Moot Court and Lawyering Skills Program, Assistant Dean for Admission and Financial Aid, an advisor to the Black Law Student Association and Asian Pacific American Law Student Association, and as an adjunct professor focusing on evidence, trial advocacy, and appellate advocacy. In 1999, he left the university to work as an assistant United States attorney for the Department of Justice. In 2001, he returned to the College of Law to resume his duties as Senior Assistant Dean for Admission and Financial Aid, and to head the Office of Diversity and Inclusion within the law school. as its inaugural director and law school chief diversity officer. In 2015, he became assistant vice provost for Ohio State University's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. In 2020, he was appointed vice president for the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity at Case Western Reserve University. Robert has been active in the community, serving on various boards throughout the years, including Equal Justice Foundation, the Columbus Academy, Mansion Day School, and Ohio Valley University. Robert has been an active volunteer with the Law School Admission Council, including serving on the Board of Trustees, the Misconduct and Irregularities in Admission Subcommittee, Finance and Legal Affairs Committee, Diversity Committee, and 2011 Annual Meeting Planning Committee. He served on the Diversity Committee of the American Bar Association. Robert was active in the Columbus Bar as well, having served as the chair of the Law School Liaison Committee for the Columbus Bar Association, the Long Range Planning Committee, and the Minority Clerkship Task Force. He has served on the executive board of the John Mercer Langston Bar Association as parliamentarian, chair of Professional Development Committee, and president. Robert is a president emeritus of 100 Black Men of Central Ohio and is the board chair emeritus of the Afrocentric Personal Development Shop. His past honors have included being appointed by former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland to serve on the Ohio Ethics Commission in 2010. He was also selected by Congress to represent the district at the 2006 National African American Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. The National Hispanic Bar Association Region 10 President's Awards in 2015, and the George V. Voinovich Public Service Award from the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law in 2016. Robert, it's wonderful to have you today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
I am just blown away by both of your accomplishments. I am just proud to have the opportunity to spend this time with you and ask you questions. So thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
So we're going to get right to our questions. I was looking up some statistics about graduation rates, and the one resource that I read indicated that African Americans graduate college at approximately 42%, Caucasians at about 62%. How can we improve graduation rates in general? What do you see as the barriers? Is it really a student problem or is it an institutional problem?
I'll start with that one, Anthereca. This is my job day in and day out to think about these things. And I think one of the challenges is there is no one answer to this. And so some of the barriers, some of the challenges, some rightfully lie with the student and their responsibility to study and do what they're supposed to do. But I would dare to say a lot of responsibility lies on the university. When we look at something as simple as the language that we use when we're trying to get students to matriculate, a lot of these students don't grow up knowing what a provost is or knowing what a bursar's office is or, even what we mean by being community engaged. And so when we look at the university, we need to look at our processes. We need to look at our data to see where we think students are stopping out, what those reasons are, and put our resources towards that. Where historically universities build the framework and say, you come and find your own way through it. That's not going to work anymore. That should have never been the answer. And so I think now more than ever, it's the university's responsibility to take a look at their processes, and take a look at their students, realize who your students are, and then build your student supports accordingly to make sure that they make it through graduation. Getting in the door is no longer the challenge, it's getting out. And so we have to make sure that what we're doing is focusing on making sure they graduate and get what they need to graduate and move on to the next level.
Well, I agree 100% with what Bonita has already shared. universities really do have to take a critical analysis of what's going on with their student body. Unfortunately, there are so many obstacles for students even before they get in the door, right? And so, just build it and they will come and they should thrive is not a good formula for success. Institutions really need to provide adequate resources to support students throughout their matriculation, and they may be varied. And I would also add that African American students are not monolithic. While in fact there are a number of students who may come from under-resourced places, and they may need more financial resources and supports and information. Some students don't come from under-resourced places, but they are still trying to thrive in an institution that really is infused with systemic racism. I mean, that's the reality of our world. Higher education is no different. And what I mean by that is that if the system was not designed for their success, then more likely than not, the people who succeed are the exception and not the rule. And so we have to think critically about what are the systems within the institution that's not producing success. There are students who feel isolated. They don't feel a sense of community. They're not supported. And so we need to think about what are we doing within our institutions to make sure all students can thrive, and that it's not just from one paradigm, but that we're sensitive to the needs of a broad cross-section of the population of students that are present. And so certainly African-American students are no exception to that challenge. So absolutely, student responsibility is always part of it, but the institution who's in the education business should think about this more critically to make sure that they can provide a greater success of the students that matriculate.
Can you all speak a little more to the specific barriers that students of color may have in actually accessing college education?
You really have to start thinking of preparing for college in middle school, actually your whole career. And I think that's where our systems, again, fail us. Again, we're still teaching kind of the basic arithmetic and basic things in the 8th grade and not talking about thinking about college, what college is and what you get to. By the time you get to your senior year, it's almost too late. And so what we do is they wait to their senior year. We shove all these applications in their face. A lot of students don't even know that there's different types of colleges. And so they're just going on what they heard. Xavier is close to me, so I'm just going to go there. And so they don't do enough research. We don't provide enough information and intel. We don't provide support to make sure that what they're taking in their high school translates to college. There's a big bridge there, or gap there that's not being met. Colleges, we need to provide access to complete all the paperwork that we put in front of them that may or may not be needed. I debate about that every day, all day. Financial aid form, the FAFSA is just in a different language. I've been in higher ed for years, and when I filled it out for my kids, I had a moment. I was really frustrated. I said, I can't imagine students who don't have support making it through this application process. And then once they've been accepted, again, they get bombarded again with all these messages and language they don't understand. They don't know what's important. They have to have 15 different logins to register for housing, to register for food. And so it just starts early in their K-12 all the way until they literally get an acceptance letter. There's barriers all along the way.
Yeah, I again, Bonita hits it right on the head. And I keep going back to really what's on the minds of most people today, and that is the impact of systemic racism within American society, right? And all of those things contribute to the educational barriers. So we know that there's a wealth gap, there's a health gap, there's an education gap. All these challenges are happening before the student can even get to the doors of an institution. So if you're fighting all of these barriers, and sometimes survival is simply the most important thing that students and their families are dealing with, then somehow that higher education may seem secondary. And so we really do need to think holistically about how we can help students. And there are a number of programs out there that are institution-specific, community-specific, that can really help to combat some of those barriers. One of the programs coming from Ohio State we had is the Young Scholars Program, which is in 9 of the urban centers all over the state of Ohio. And we start with the students in the 9th grade, and when 8th grade, going to the 9th grade, and really it's getting them ready to simply apply, right? Knowing what to fill out and what they should take. We discovered that some districts that we had to really battle with because there were students who were being given math that would be insufficient for them to be successful in college, and pushing the institution to provide what colleges and universities are looking for. Case has a Provost Scholars Program and an Emerging Scholars Program that functions in much the same way that Ohio State's Young Scholars Programs. And so institutions may have particular programs that are considered pipeline efforts, right, to help prepare the students to enter the institution, but the institutions can't do it all. We really do need community support, we need governmental support, and we need our educational institutions, middle schools, high schools, elementary schools, really preparing the young people to think about where's your career path, what are you going to be doing after this, so that they're thinking more critically about those things.
In a world where the internet is a common source of free education, why should students continue to consider pursuing degrees at colleges and universities? What is the value that a college or university-based education brings to the student? What are those transferable skills or competencies that can be gained from this type of education?
And I'll start there. I do think that the traditional college education may not be what is optimal for every student. And there might be other courses that they might pursue, but in my opinion, I think that information on the internet alone is insufficient to prepare students, I think, for ultimate career success. I think that there are exceptions to everything, and I think that there's some people who might be able to navigate that, but I still think that that would be the exception and not the rule. And I'm sort of old-fashioned in the sense that I do think that having a quality in-person university education is valuable. I mean, it's possible to not really get the highest quality, but I think that for most institutions are invested and have thought critically about how will we deliver this education to help students to progress and to make the steps from one step to the other. The other thing that I think is important is I think that a good deal of emotional intelligence develops and grows from the interaction that one might engage in when they're on a college campus or they're interacting with their peers and with professors and staff at a university. And I think that it can be challenging if the computer screen is their only real interaction, certainly in an academic space. And I'm sure you all can see some of the challenges with some individuals who seem really focused on that and have lost some soft skills in order to progress and to move forward. So I think that colleges and universities can provide mentoring, direction, guidance, helping people to think critically, to develop some of those soft skills, those emotional skills that allow them to be successful to utilize that and going into a professional environment and engaging with other individuals. And so there's certainly value there. So I believe that connection is important.
Absolutely. And I think COVID has shown this even more. A lot of colleges were worried that students weren't going to come back. But what we were hearing from students is we need that interaction. I need to talk to my faculty. I need that hands-on experience, because they realized that without it in that virtual world, they weren't getting what they thought they were going to get. And so while, like Robert said, some people do well in online, a lot of people don't. They want that interaction. They want that mentoring. They want that in-person guidance, because that's going to help them as they progress into their careers.
Yes. Yes. The other aspect of college education that I think is important to note is just the professional network that you become a part of. I'm sure many of us have met our peers, and they may be in certain specialties or industries that in the future may become a valuable connection.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I probably we all know people that we met during our education, both our undergraduate and our professional degrees, and those are still good contacts, people that we interact with, and we're able to advance our careers. We're able to learn from, engage with, create opportunities for students that we work with along the way. There is really a vast resource that comes from networking and developing those relationships among our peers.
So let's talk a little bit about COVID-19. What long-term impact do you believe the COVID-19 pandemic will have on education and our overall preparation for higher education, particularly in low-income communities?
Interestingly, I think there have been pros and cons. I think that COVID-19 has really exposed the fault lines that we already knew that were there, right? That the economic gap, and now we see there's a tech gap, right? You know, all these elementary and middle school, high schools going to online learning. And the question is, how can you go to online learning when you don't have software, you don't have Wi-Fi, you don't have any of those resources. You're supposed to stay in your home. You can't go to these public entities that were often the source, like the library and all those gathering places, were the source of technology or getting Wi-Fi for many people in underserved communities. So I think the economic gap means that there's some people who will be behind in the process. And really, it's yet again another barrier that impacts poor minority communities, right? And so I think that will have an impact. I would say on the positive side, it has loosened the grip on some traditional methods. And so, you know, Bonita talked about students who really want to come back and be together. And I think that's really important, but it also means that, you know, we can think a little more creatively in how we deliver education, that it doesn't necessarily have to be all in person, that we can, you know, provide some assignments electronically, that we can be more creative in what we do to deliver education. And I think that not in the educational space, but many places in industry have discovered that, okay, maybe we can have more remote workers than we thought we could. It'll be interesting to see what that transformation is. I know Dr. Lane, I'm sure you've been doing some telemedicine, and you probably were not planning to do that. And when everything's back to normal as we see it, you might still have a mix of in-person and telemedicine because you might be able to serve more people that way. You never know. So, but I do think that those impacts on minority communities and poor communities are clear. You know, obviously the African-American community, and hopefully the impact is that we will be better prepared and that we will provide those resources going forward. I think that we'll have a little bit of a period of catch up. And like everything, the Black community gets harder. You know, when America gets a cold, we get pneumonia. So we know that that's how it works. So there will be some challenges, but I also hope that it will open the eyes of many people so that we can prepare better and fill those gaps moving forward.
And I think Robert was absolutely right on this being an opportunity. Again, some of our students, you know, some of they lost family members during this pandemic, which means their whole family financial situation was set back. Some people have had to stop out. But what that has done has shown the greater public at large that there is an issue. And so now we're raising more money. Scholarships are now being awarded differently. We're looking at some of our internal standards and say, does that rule really make sense? Well, no, we can move that and think the sky won't fall. And so while there's a negative, like Robert said, there is a silver lining. I think a lot of universities are trying to use this moment to knock down walls to better support students, because it took the curtain down on a lot of things. That technology piece was significant. We found out that not only did our students not have technology, there were some faculty members who really just kind of live off the grid. So they didn't have the technology and the hotspots either. And so we ended up buying a lot of technology and tools and just giving it out to faculty, staff, and students so that they could stay connected. But like I said, and our low-income students were particularly hit hard with that. But I'm proud to say they took advantage of those opportunities and they were able to still maintain. And so again, it shows that resiliency. It shows the challenges, and that universities and faculty and staff and students can work together to overcome things like this.
Yes. So in your current roles, you may have the opportunity to hire new employees. Which is most important, experience or college education?
I had to laugh at this question because as I'm doing in my hiring, I'm looking at both. I really wish I could say it only relied on the experience, but when you work in an institution of higher education, you really have to justify hiring someone that doesn't have one. And it really depends on the role. Higher education works on a credibility. So where did you go to school? What did you get your degree in before I can really hear you? But I like to look at the experience because, for instance, if someone's worked at a HBCU, I kind of give them a little bit more credit because I know they had to wear more hats because HBCUs don't have all the resources. So that person probably has done a lot more than someone who worked at a large institution and they had one role. And so I read between the lines. I look at the experience. I see what they did. If there's any periods of stop outs, I want to know why. Because again, if they're a minority, there's probably something that happened. And I don't want to just dismiss that. But that degree in higher ed is your ticket into a job.
Yes, I absolutely agree that those two are not mutually exclusive. I think that ideally you have both, right? Experience and that education. But also a college education, completing a degree sends the message that you have the fortitude, the ability, the focus to finish something. And that's a clear message there. And it may depend upon where you went to school. And I think Bonita's right. You look deeply into the experiences that the person has. But I do think that a college education still has incredible value. Experience is useful, but we are in higher education. And the reality is you might be able to get away with it a little bit more in industry, but in higher education, that really is a minimum. That we want to see that you valued higher education, that you completed it, and that you went through. And I'm sure Bonita can attest to this. Usually people who have only a bachelor's, before long, they're working on advanced degrees while they're working at the institution. I mean, that is a common scenario that we find because higher education is valued in these institutions, and we encourage it. We want you to advance. We want you to learn. We want you to grow. And even if you have a position where someone comes in without a degree, then you can rest assured that they're being encouraged to complete their education and to keep moving forward.
Let's talk a little bit about student loan debt. Some resources indicate that there is a wealth gap between African Americans and Caucasians that is directly related to student loan debt. Why is a college education so expensive? And from an administrative perspective, what are the challenges that arise when funding institutions? Is the only option to transfer this expense to students in the form of loans?
That's a loaded question, Dr. Lane.
Yes.
There's so many parts to that. But I'm going to start by saying that higher ed is one of the most highly regulated industries. And what I mean by that is we're governed by so many different bodies. We're subject to so many different rules and regulations. And there's a cost to compliance. So somebody has to fill those reports and do that data and make sure we're in compliance with this law and this rule. So those are kind of big built-in fixed costs that we have to have outside of the faculty and the staff and the facilities and all of that. And so there's a lot of fixed costs that higher ed can't get away with. At the same time, we only have a few buckets of funding. So you have your tuition, you have what state funding you get that's being decreased every day. You might have auxiliary services and grants and donations. The only thing that's really flexible in that is the tuition. So that's where universities usually go to get that extra money because there's nowhere else to get it if all your other areas are out of your control. And so what I would tell people is voting is important. Telling your legislators to fund education is important because that's where the funding to me should come from. If you're a state institution, the state should support it through funding so that your citizenship is educated. And so while we don't want to put it on the backs of students, unfortunately, that seems to be what's happening. And again, with mostly with your minority students, our families don't have that money just lying around somewhere. So we have to go take out loans. Personally, I'm no different. I had to take out loans while my colleagues, their families were writing checks to pay for their careers. I mean, for their education. So when we get out of school and we get our first jobs, half of my check is going to pay for school loans while they can pretty much build their wealth. They can buy their homes, they can travel. And so that just keeps compounding over the years, which is where we are with that wealth gap. So again, we don't want to put it on students and loans, but there's so many variables and components. The higher education is struggling, and we need to be figuring out another funding model. But again, that comes with its own challenges in and of itself.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it better myself. I know that there are some people who think that higher education is the next, like the home lending crisis, and the higher education is next, moving to a collapse. And so there's certainly many people who are advocating for rethinking the model that's used. But it's not an easy thing. I mean, all of us who manage our homes, we know that the bills have to be paid, and that there are benefits that are received, and those benefits that students receive do cost money, and you have to think creatively about how to do it. Now, one of the ways that institutions try to decrease that cost is to raise as much money as they possibly can through philanthropy. So scholarships and funding to support programs that go on at institutions is one way to raise money, or to reduce the cost to students. And I remember some time ago when I was at Ohio State, what we would tell students is that how much of a percentage of your education is actually being paid for by donors and the endowment. So even though the cost is continuing to escalate, I think that fundraising can be part of it. But I will note that there have been more efforts to freeze education costs, and particularly coming out of COVID, I think that a number of institutions have said that we're going to freeze this cost, so that recognizing that there are impacts that we can't possibly address. I think that some institutions also try to have need-based funds available, and hopefully those funds are robust enough to make sure that the students who have great need don't have the same kinds of financial pressures as those who come from families who can write the check, right? And there are some who can, and so they do needs assessments on the students that attend. But we know that that middle class, it's like it hits you coming and going. I've had two graduate from college, and one in grad school and fully funded, thank goodness, and another one looking at law school. So, how do you pay for that? And if you're in the middle class, you are not eligible for certain grants and funding, and you're certainly not wealthy enough to just write a check. I don't know about you, but I can't write a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 check for my kids to start their education. And so I have to think more creatively about how to do it. But my main point is that there are some institutions who are listening and trying to think of better ways and better funding models, freezing tuition costs, and proceeding in that fashion. But there may be a transformation, and maybe COVID will also be another eye-opening experience that will require institutions to engage in some transformation, because the costs that institutions have suffered have resulted in layoffs and furloughs and budget cuts. I know, for me in my own shop, I had to cut 12% out of my budget for this fiscal year in order to accommodate for the losses that we experienced. And again, maybe institutions might discover that they might be able to be leaner and more efficient and be able to pass those savings on to students.
When I was a college student and president of the African American Student Union at the University of California, San Diego, one of our demands as we took over the lawn at the vice provost office was to increase the number of faculty of color. I would have killed for this opportunity to talk to both of you at that time. So what is the real deal? Why is this such a challenge?
Robert, I'll let you have that one.
All right. Well, that is squarely on my plate. And certainly I've been thinking about it even throughout all of my career in higher education. So I think that institutions have to be strategic. There has to be a commitment by leadership to move the needle and to be aggressive in what they do. It's really, I had a conversation with the president of our Black Alumni Association just earlier today, and her comment was that we've been talking about it, and I've been a part of this organization for 10 years, and it seems that we haven't moved the needle. We kind of stayed the same, right? And part of that process is that sometimes every time you move forward, you lose your progress. Some of it is based upon a shorter supply of African American Black faculty, right? But that's not an excuse, because the Black scholars are out there. They're definitely out there. But institutions of higher education, first of all, they need to engage in best practices in yielding more Black faculty. And that will require them shifting their paradigm. They shouldn't narrow the search. They should think more creatively about, what do we need in this institution? We know that it is constitutionally permissible for diversity to be a legitimate government interest in higher education, right? So that includes hiring. And so there's nothing illegal about saying that we lack diversity, and if we want to provide a rich and robust education for our students, we need a better cross-section and representation among our faculty. So it's okay, but what I usually find, you said what's the real deal? I think what I usually find is that sometimes people don't want to put in the work. You've got to do some searching. You've got to use your contacts and take advantage of your networks. One of the things that I do a training for anytime someone is hiring, I conduct trainings on interrupting bias in the faculty search process. And so everyone who's on a search committee has to go through this training. And the training is great, but you also have to execute. You can't just check a box and say, okay, I did the training, now let me go back to what I did before. You can't do that. You have to be willing to make some brave steps and moves, and you have to be willing to put in extra work. And really, I think that the paradigm has to shift to thinking, just like Bonita mentioned in admissions, that I build it and they will come. And that's not how it works. If you want a diverse faculty, you're going to have to go out there and get them, and to find them and recruit them and woo them, and not just get them there, but they also want to know that it's a place that they can thrive, that they will be supported, that there's a sense of community, that there will be a critical mass. And that's tough, because if you don't have a critical mass, people are like, well, there are only a handful or so, I don't know. So you really have to make the case that, hey, you're not the last. We are going to continue this process, and we want you to participate in this process, and we're going to invest in you, and we're going to provide these resources to support what you're doing.
Well, I will follow up. I've worked at several large majority institutions, and it's a problem at every university. And what you
Hmm.
hear is there's not enough out there. I
Hmm.
won't accept that one. Like Robert said, all you have to do is put in the work. And also, universities I think have to develop the pipeline. Like I think that's
Yes.
part of our responsibility as well. And some colleges are doing it. Some have great programs, but majority do not. And so that's a pipeline program. And I'm just going to be honest, most of your hiring people in these departments are older white males, and they're comfortable hiring who they're comfortable with. And so we have to break down that barriers, whether it's by incentives, which some universities have done. They've given incentive funding for diversity hiring, and penalization, taking away funds if your
Hmm.
department is not diverse. So it takes strong leaders to do that, but I've seen it done. And then the other piece again is once they get there, making them feel comfortable enough to stay. And that's what we're working on right now at NKU. Our Black faculty and staff, we've organized. We're reaching out during the search process, and that when they hire, we're supporting them and wrapping our arms around them to know that there is a community here. You have to be so intentional about doing that. And I know students want it instantly. And Antherica, I can see you protesting about that, wanting
Yeah.
that instantly, but it
Yeah.
does take time. It does take work. And then there's stiff competition. Once you do hire them, other universities will try to steal them and they will
Mhm.
offer them more money. And so we've
Yes.
lost quite a few faculty members at all the other schools I've worked at, just sheer competition for
Mhm.
that talent. And so you have to make sure you have the funding in place and you give them the resources and support they need so that they want to stay.
How do you define diversity and inclusion, and why is it so important for colleges and universities to make diversity and inclusion a strategic goal?
Well, some people describe the difference between diversity and inclusion as, and yeah, I'm sure you've heard this. You know, diversity is being invited to the dance, and inclusion is being asked to dance when you get there, right? And we often talk about inclusive excellence. That we want diversity, but we also want it to be an inclusive environment. And I think that that's really one of the focuses of Dr. Beverly Tatum's book. Why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? Because just because we're there doesn't mean that we are actually engaged in a part of the broader community. But I absolutely believe it has to be part of one of the university's strategic goals. If we're really going to diversify, if we're going to make a difference, it will not happen by accident. It has to be a strategic goal. I am thankful that was what happened at Case Western. My office was created about 11 years ago. My role was in place about 11 years ago. At Ohio State, that role was in place. Ohio State celebrating 50 years, right? And so there are institutions who are all along the continuum in their efforts to make diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic goals. And again, if you don't plan for it, if you do not make an intentional effort to do this, it won't happen. And I will say this: we are, which is becoming more clear. We are engaged in a pluralistic society, and it is my belief that we do our students a disservice when we do not provide them a diverse education. And when I think about diversity inclusion, I think of what I call the 4 C's: a community, culture, climate, and curriculum. Community, that's the demographics, right? Who's here, who's not here? And that's the question that has to be asked. Who's not at the table? Who's not present? What voices or what perspectives are we not getting? The climate is basically, what's it like here? How does it feel? Is it a place I can thrive, that everyone is valued and appreciated? And the culture is, how do you create a climate? What do we do? What are we known for? Are we known for being welcoming and an engaging atmosphere? Are we known for valuing different people? And certainly curriculum is recognizing that diversity in curriculum comes in 2 ways: in the classroom. In other words, not just um, in political science classes or critical race theory, but also, you're a scientist, you're a medical doctor, Anthereca, so you know that you should hear about Henrietta Lacks, right?
Mhm.
About Charles Drew. You should hear about the contributions of Black people and people from all over the world who contributed to these subjects that students are studying. It should not just be this monolithic Eurocentric view. And so the curriculum has to have diversity. And then we have those additional, and so co-curricular efforts to educate, having lectures, bringing in speakers, getting people to think critically in a broader sense in our social sphere about issues of equality, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, racism, sexism, xenophobia, whatever those things are, making sure that we engage our entire community, particularly our students. And this is important for our underrepresented students, and our white students need to gain this education as well, because they will be ill-equipped to function in this pluralistic society and world if we do not provide them with a well-rounded, diverse education.
Robert, I think you are so right. And I think the recent social unrest with the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have brought that to life. Even though it was the summertime, our Black students were crying out. They were in pain, they were upset, they were frustrated, and even our white students were reaching out. They wanted to talk, they wanted to discuss, they wanted to be heard. A lot of our faculty members seems like their eyes were opened for the first time and they were asking questions. What can I do differently?
Right.
I'm hurt that I haven't thought about how my students felt. They thought just getting the minority students there was enough. Well, no, that's just the first step. You have to look at your curriculum. You have to look at how you treat them in the classroom. Are you acknowledging them? Are you listening to them when they talk to you? When you meet with them in your office hours, are your office hours set up at a time and a place that they feel comfortable? And so this social unrest actually, I think, is an opportunity for universities to bring this more to the forefront for our students, because Robert was absolutely right. If you don't know how to navigate these waters, you're not going to be successful in the workplace, because unfortunately, these issues aren't going anywhere. And so we need our students to be more equipped. We need our faculty to be equipped to talk about these things so that they all can go out and contribute to society.
So, Bonita, as you mentioned, there really is so much going on in the world right now, really from healthcare crisis to civil unrest. How do we keep education relevant? And how do you produce a generation of thinkers and influencers?
Yeah, I would just add that it's really important to engage in continuous dialogue, particularly with the younger generation. And I was thinking about your question, and of course, Bonita and I share something special, and that is that we have legal educations, and that's exactly what we're trained to do: engage in critical thought, to challenge propositions that people put before us, and try to analyze them so that we can come up with solutions and we can move forward. And I know that a number of students might feel that they're tired of talking to universities, but we do have to engage in this dialogue. And it might be tough, it might be challenging, but we do have to continue to engage in this dialogue. But not from the standpoint of engaging in it just because we are in the ivory tower. So that's the other background that we share. Lawyers tend to be practical, so we don't want to just talk about it so we can talk about it. Okay, now that we talked about it, what are we going to do? And so that's the next step. How can we translate these discussions and these ideas into action, and so that they are practical, so that we can have measurable goals, so that we can be able to go back and say, okay, we did X, Y, and Z. Let's measure that. Was that successful? Then let's do more of it if we were successful. If it wasn't successful, let's think about other things that we can do, and to engage in that process to yield fruit and not just to have academic discussions.
And I also think that, universities pride themselves on developing the whole person. We challenge your thinking. But I think we've gotten a little lax on that over the years, because we don't have the hard race discussions. We don't talk about civic responsibility and duties and taking care of each other and how we're a connected community. So I think universities have to get back to that. We're actually doing that with our freshmen this year. We're going back to a common read, and it's, of course, it's about race. We're going to have them do assignments and projects. They're going to have them engage in things to make them come face to face with some racial topics. And so I think universities have to reclaim that role and really put it into effect and to work inside and outside of the classroom. Again, I think these crises are moments for innovation and reclaiming some things. And so I hope a lot of universities are embracing this and will do that so that we can create the next generation of thinkers and empathizers and people who want to believe in fairness and justice for all.
As I talk to various professionals from different industries, I really want to shed light on systemic racism. How do you see systemic racism in education, and what can you do about it in your current roles?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think when we think about systemic racism, it's important to note that if you removed every bad actor from the system, would the system still yield inequitable results, right? And that allows us to see what about the system is broken, right? What within the system needs to change. And so I think that the first place that we have to start is to look at the outcomes. And I think that you talked about some of those outcomes, like graduation rates and faculty hiring. Those really are inequitable outcomes when you look at, even if you look at what the population is, either in the city where the institutions are or the student body. I mean, usually when you think about the faculty numbers versus the student body, usually the student body tends to be far more diverse than the faculty. So that tells you that system is not working properly. And so let's go back and see what we can do differently. There's the old Rita Mae Brown quote is, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's insanity, the definition of insanity. So, but people will do it, and even in higher education. I mean, it is one of the most conservative hiring processes that you will find in the country. And so we have to go back and change the system and look at the results it's producing and say, what are some of the variables that we can engage in to change the system? And we can do the same thing with enrollments. We can do it with graduation rates. We can do it with awarding financial aid and scholarships. There's a whole host of things. So I would say engage in an analysis of the system by looking at what the results are. And if we can all agree that the results are inequitable, then we don't have to spend a lot of time arguing over whether there was a bad actor. Let's just look at the system. Let's change the system.
That's exactly right. And that's really where my role came about as Chief Innovation Officer, as Chief Strategy Officer, and looking at our student success as our strategic plan. Is I'm looking at all those systems and processes, and I'm challenging the status quo. Why is this way? Why are we not recruiting more students from Cincinnati? Why? Just why? And you have to get to that answer as to why. And I don't take the first answer they give me because I know that's not the only answer. And so if universities don't take the time to be deliberate and intentional about looking at where the gaps are, where are the funnels, where are the leaky pipes at, where are we losing students? You have to be intentional about looking at those things. That's the only way you're going to get to those systems. And look at those disparate impacts and look at unintended consequences. And so you just have to be intentional about doing that. And again, that is part of my role. And I'm teaching others how to look the same way and how to ask those questions. So they're now bringing questions to me, which I find amazing. And I love it because that means I've planted seeds. People now understand that we just can't do business as usual. We have to ask questions and look for the root cause.
Well, I could definitely talk to both of you all night. We've been talking to Bonita Brown, Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer for Northern Kentucky University. We've been also talking with Robert Solomon, Vice President, Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity at Case Western Reserve University. If you have been with us throughout this entire conversation, you have received a masterclass on higher education. I hope you learned something today, something that is going to change your personal paradigm of how you're going to approach this topic of higher education. Thank you so much, Bonita. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been just an excellent discussion.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you.